the kitchen. Oh,
Sorry,
recording is in
almost
progress
forgot.
now. Um, so anyway, Economic Action Maryland Fund works on the bread and butter issues that families and individuals across the state struggle with. So when you're sitting at the kitchen table trying to figure out which bill to pay, that's probably an issue we work on. So issues around debt, issues around policies that really criminalize poverty, issues around the needs of vulnerable populations, particularly older adults, policies that address the racial wealth gap or that have a disparate impact on our Black and Brown communities. Um, Things like whether you pay your utility bill or your auto insurance, the price of housing, whether it's your home or you're renting, what kinds of protections you have. So we really work on a broad range of issues. We're lucky to have more than 8,000 supporters across the state, and we run three direct service programs. One that focuses on the needs of older adults, our SOAR program, which this year has returned more than $900,000 to older adults through homeowners and renters tax credits. Our Fair Housing program, which focuses on educating people about source of income and also reasonable accommodations, and our tenant advocacy program, which has assisted more than 700 tenants this year, helping them with their rights, informing land property management companies about their responsibilities, and assisting people in advocating for their cases. So um, there's a lot going on right now. As I've been saying multiple times, it's a very difficult year on every level. And I think we want to talk about, with all of the federal challenges coming from every area, what can we do in Maryland, particularly in the 90-day legislative session, to protect Marylanders, to try to expand rights and make progress, as well as defend against and backfill in some of the places where federal law is being rolled back. So I think I'll just stop there and we'll move on. So I think we're going to want to welcome our guest speaker, Bryan Sears, who is the Maryland State House reporter for Maryland Matters. Um, this tells you a little bit about Bryan. We are thrilled to have him here. As you can see, he works for Maryland Matters now, has worked in the State House for more than 2 decades, and has won awards for his reporting. So I think there's a lot to talk about, especially in the past few days with new issues emerging in for the General Assembly and a special session. So let me just turn it over to Bryan to talk about what he's seen in the near and 90-day future.
There's really very little to talk about, isn't there?
Yes.
Uh, I think I was talking to Jennifer yesterday, and yesterday's news kind of I think kind of altered the trajectory of the discussion we're going to have, and I think we'll start there with the sudden announcement of the Speaker of the House stepping down. She's the House Speaker Adrienne Jones, as many of you know, the first black woman and first woman to preside over either chamber in the Maryland General Assembly in the history of the state, announced yesterday suddenly that she was stepping down from her role. She's apparently for now going to remain in the chamber, but we will now go through the process of picking a new Speaker of the House. That process began in earnest yesterday at after 3 o'clock when the announcement was made. Well, I think we're likely to have some sort of a special session that would start maybe on December 16th. The Democratic caucus, which will pick the new speaker, meets the same day in the morning. And there is at this point a lot of discussion about having a special session for the purposes of electing a speaker. I'd point out that that's not necessary. The caucus could come in and meet on the 16th, and for however long it takes them to pick a new leader, they could come out of that meeting having picked a new leader and simply come back in January. But there does seem to be at least some thought towards having a special session to make that official. They would then have to come back in January and still reelect a new a speaker to start the 2026 session. It's going to be interesting to see who takes that position. There are some, I guess, some in the initial hours after this. There are some candidates that are starting to emerge that are a little stronger than others. I would say right now, as it stands today, and this is 12:40 on December 5th. And so all of this is subject to change, but I would say right now the three that sort of stand out are House Appropriations Chair Ben Barnes, House Health and Government Operations Chair Jocelyn Pena-Melnick, and C.T. Wilson. I mean, they're three chairs. I think they're the top three to pay attention to. There's a number of other candidates that are either in or weighing their options. Barnes has been laying the groundwork for this probably for about 6 weeks. There started to become some activity we started to see right before the Democratic Caucus fundraiser in November, where he was starting to write some checks, and it was, I was hearing from sources that it sounded like he was counting votes. Pena-Melnick is coming to this a little bit late, but I think anybody that knows the chair knows that she is she's exceptionally dogged, and I don't think that you can count her out. I don't think that this race has been decided at all yet. And it may take several rounds, as we saw in 2019. It may take several rounds of voting. I do think that one of the things that they'll try to avoid is getting to the point where they have some sort of a consensus candidate. I think they'd like to try and solve this fairly quickly. The other thing that'll be interesting to see who gets picked will be really important to the relationship of the chamber. The chamber and the governor's office. I would suggest that Ben Barnes probably has a little more of an uncomfortable relationship with the governor, and so that could really change the tenor of discussions. Between the House and the second floor, especially going into the governor's last session of his first term. It'll be interesting to see in terms of the special session. I think that special session is going to be less about redistricting and more primarily about the speaker, but also I'm starting to hear about some bills in response to the some of the things that we're seeing going on at the federal level with the president. Primarily some 287G legislation. I think there'll be some legislation related to federal agents and the use of masks. There'll be a number of other bills that I've heard some rumblings that those bills could come up during the special session. I do not anticipate again today at 12:43 that we're going to see redistricting, and I sort of say that and I'm being snarky about it because I would tell you yesterday the conversation about redistricting and whether we would or wouldn't see maps and a redistricting bill in special session changed 3 times in the space of about 12 hours yesterday. There are moments where it feels like we are building the plane while we're attempting to fly it on this issue. As it stands right now, I think there's a really good chance that we're going to see some sort of legislation maybe to start the session. We'll maybe get a better idea of what's going to happen with that tonight after the redistricting commission meets at 4 o'clock. And I think that they're also going to announce that they're going to have one more meeting on December 12th before they wrap up. And then we'll head into session, and again, nothing really going on there except a $1.5 billion budget deficit that we didn't expect that we were going to have to solve. that we will now have to solve, and we're going to take taxes off the table, I think, pretty quickly. The both leaders in both houses have been very clear about that. It was a question I didn't think I needed to ask because it's the last year of the term, and we typically don't go into election years talking about taxes. But it was the size of the hole it was surprising, and I think there's still it's subject to a little bit of tweaking. We're gonna have a Board of Revenue estimates meeting coming up in the next week or so. That's going to give us a better idea of exactly what the fiscal picture is. I'm expecting it's probably going to be a little worse. I wouldn't be surprised to see a write down. There are some economic experts nationally that are saying that Maryland is either in a recession or dangling on the edge of a recession, and so I think that that's going to color a lot of the conversations about budget. And so if we're not doing taxes, that really kind of means we're going to be doing belt tightening, and I think that we might see real cuts. There's going to be an effort, I think, to avoid touching the rainy day account. There was a large discussion about that during spending affordability last month, and the bond rating agencies really are starting to become uncomfortable with the idea of Maryland touching its rainy day fund. 5% is the statutory limit. Maryland is at 8%. But the bond rating agencies really feel like Maryland is behind its peer groups in terms of the money that it's socked away for a rainy day. And so I think it's really it's not only going to have to pour in Maryland, but we might actually be looking at having to pull up our waders for them to get to the point where they're gonna start touching that account, at least in the short term. I do think we'll see a redistricting bill probably to start the session. If anything's going to happen with that, it's going to happen fast, because as we get closer to February 1st, the folks that I'm talking to are telling me that anything that's passed after February 1st is going to have catastrophic effects on the primary election and the schedules that are set there. And I use that term catastrophic. That is almost a direct quote from someone that I spoke with who is very concerned about pushing this back, pushing any decision on redistricting back into February. At this point, I don't see the Senate changing very much on this, and so I'm not sure whether or not Maryland actually passes a redistricting bill. A couple of other items on the list. I think we're going to see a return of housing discussions. I think the governor is going to bring back his bill that failed. I think that there will be some discussion on that, whether or not the governor's bill ultimately is the vehicle that passes, or there's another one that we have yet to see. Remains to be seen. I know that the Maryland Association of Counties is very, very concerned about anything at a state level that starts to diminish local authority over zoning. And so we've seen that play out a number of years. If any of you have been here long enough to remember the Planned Maryland days and how big of a pushback there was on that, I think won't be surprised by what we've seen so far with reaction to the governor's bill last year. We're going to see some energy bills. I think we'll probably see a return of the governor's nuclear bill. There'll be some other interests around affordability, and for the most part, I mean, I think again, for those who have watched for any length of time, they won't be surprised to hear me say this. Like these last years tend to be, the last session of the term tends to be a session where they try to do things that are as non-controversial as popular. How much, to what degree they're successful in doing that this year, given the tone at the national level and some of the very significant problems that Maryland is facing, again, remains to be seen. But this promises to be a really interesting and perhaps fast-paced 90 days. I'm a little, Jennifer, I'm a little ahead of my time, but I think I'm going to stop there because I'd really be interested in sort of taking questions and hearing what you guys want to talk about.
That sounds great. And thank you for that great overview. Anyone who has questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A or in the chat. I'll monitor both. We do have one question already, and maybe you can dig back in your memory the process for when the speaker got elected. How public is the the sort of nomination in caucus of a new speaker. My recollection is not very, but can you talk a bit about, what becomes public and what tends to stay hidden away?
I think what becomes public is really what members are willing to talk about. I mean, we will start to get we have a good sense of the candidate list that's developing. What and to some degree, I mean, I'm having some conversations with members privately about some of what the jockeying for position looks like. But for the most part, a lot of this is going to happen behind closed doors. I can tell you, I remember in 2019, standing outside of a closed door meeting where like we knew people were talking, and like my only source of information were text messages that I was getting from inside the room, and occasionally when somebody would make the mistake of wandering outside the door and trying to run the gauntlet that was collecting outside. I mean, so it's a fairly closed process until it isn't.
Someone wisely observed, figure out which legislators smoke and go hang out in the smoking section.
Yeah, I got to tell you, that's getting less and less these days, isn't it?
That's true.
We need those vices, right? For at least that. I'm wondering, it's also just interesting to me, and I don't know if you can talk a little bit about this, Brian, but of course, the short list of candidates, most of them hold important positions right now on committees, and what that kind of cascade effect might look like on for any of those committees. It would be a huge seismic shift.
It really could be. I mean, it also could be depending on how this all gets worked out. I mean, there is something to be said about institutional knowledge, and if you start to see committee chairs who sense that they have some votes but don't have enough to put them over the top, you might see some deal cutting, and committee chairs who then like attempt will pledge their support and try to bring along the people who are supporting them in an effort to either keep their committee chairmanship or to perhaps improve their position, like maybe they're chairing or vice chairing a committee that they would rather move to something else. There are a lot of deals to be cut here, and so there's going to be a lot of wheeling, and there's also going to be a lot of deals to be cut for people who are not chairs, who maybe would be interested in throwing support behind a candidate if they can move into leadership. So I think that's all of these permutations are going to be part of the calculations here that are getting made almost on a daily basis.
We've also had some great questions. This pivots us a little bit, but there's obviously specific financial impacts at the state level from federal actions, and some of the ones that have been mentioned, the cuts to SNAP, potential increased premiums on healthcare, especially with the ACA if there's no resolution, and then obviously the huge impact of federal layoffs on our federal employees. Are you hearing any, given the budget constraints, any specific responses or actions to that at the state level, or anything we can expect there?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think the one thing you can definitely expect is if these cuts stand, Maryland, like every other state in the country, will not be able to offset these in and of itself. The numbers are just too big, and so at some point, the state is either going to have to prioritize what services get paid for and what don't, or if they take an across the board approach, I mean, the line drawing is going to be pretty hard and I think uncomfortable for a lot of people. The state just can't afford it. I mean, so I think we're all waiting to see. I mean, we've had a lot of questions about that, and I'll tell you, I mean, one of the things you didn't mention, and I'll use this as an example of just how bad things are, is as you all know, there was a flooding disaster in Western Maryland. The price tag on that is about $33 million right now, and the state was denied FEMA aid. And there are discussions about how much the state can step up and backfill that hole. That's $33 million. And so, I mean, like, there's some ideas of where that money can come from, but still the fact that, like, in in a total budget of $67 billion, I would tell you most, if a committee chair came to me and said, we're entering session with a $33 million budget hole, I don't think any of us who know the budget would blink a whole lot, because $33 million is kind of is at the very least a rounding error. And but now we're talking about $33 million and how we can come up with that to pay for some very serious needs in Western Maryland because of a natural disaster. So I think every dollar is going to get scrutinized, and it's going to be very difficult to backfill any of these federal programs to the full extent if all of these cuts stand. And look, we don't know if they're going to stand or not. I mean, there's a lot of court action that's going to happen that ultimately is going to decide a lot of this too.
And we did have a participant say, thank you for mentioning that flooding. I think it's easy to forget because the news cycle is so rapid, but there are people who still haven't replaced furnaces who are, really facing a pretty bleak winter. So it's hard to like lose track of all the things that are happening right now.
I had a conversation with Mike McKay about a week and a half ago or 2 weeks ago, right after the first big snowstorm. I mean, it hit, and I was watching, and I called and was just like, what's going on with people? And one of the things that was kind of tough to hear was they were talking about opening up some family shelters, and it immediately made me think of kids who are going to school who may or may not have a home situation where they're now living in a shelter, and their source of hot meals at this point might be school. And it's like like, let's not forget, this is also the holiday season. I mean, there's it just, in talking to him, I just sort of, like I said to him, I was like, Mike, the hits just keep on coming at this point. Like, how do you guys prioritize this? I think they're all really struggling to get their arms around it.
Yeah. We've got a lot of great questions, so I apologize because I am sort of jumping around a bit. One issue that was very hot last year was, and maybe that's the wrong word to use after what you just said, so apologies, but one issue that was very front of mind last year was data centers and some of the energy impacts they're having on the state. Are we expecting any continued work? If there might be veto overrides, one of those veto overrides was, I believe, about a data center impact study. Anything you're hearing on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that all those veto overrides are in play. I think there's going to be a number of them, and I still don't have a full handle on everything that's going to come up and get over. I mean, I think we can all safely say the reparations bill is destined for a veto override. The rest of it probably is a little, to some degree, in play. I mean, look, I think one of the things that's going to happen with data centers is like they are inextricably linked to the discussions that we're having about energy and energy affordability. And so, and then also the environment because of the cooling needs. And so, yeah, I think all of this is going to be a discussion, especially given the fact that the governor has clearly staked out a position on wanting to increase the state's stake in things like AI and quantum and some of these other big tech big tech drivers that absolutely rely on data centers. And so, yeah, I think that's, for the foreseeable future, that's absolutely going to be a part of the discussion.
So if you had to put down a wager right now, which issues do you think will be special session and which ones do you think will be general? So you had mentioned maybe action on 287G, which is an immigration reform, masks on law enforcement. You're sort of prognosticating, and we can come back and buy you some popcorn later if you're right. But which ones do you think are going to be early, and which ones would you not expect to move as fast?
Yeah, I think it's still up in the air because, again, like as I was saying to a colleague of mine who like, this is the General Assembly is kind of new to her, and she was asking me some questions this morning, and I said, we're really kind of building the plane while we're flying it. My experience in 25 years is that the best special sessions, the ones that are the most effective, always sort of start with the idea that, the governor and the legislature are all on the same page and are coming into Annapolis for a particular reason. And we were talking about a special session for redistricting, and now we're talking about a special session for for the speaker, and now we're talking about like maybe we're going to add on the 287G, which is also strangely enough getting a hearing. There's going to be what was planned to be an advanced bill hearing on December 16th in JPR. That's now looking like that's going to be part of maybe the happening during a special session. Does that go to the floor? I don't know. I mean, this when I tell you that it's changing moment by moment, like it sounds like I'm joking, but I really truly am not. Like every time I talk to somebody, it changes, sometimes subtly, sometimes very dramatically.
Yeah. And that's probably the best note to end it on because I think that is going to be the theme for the next few weeks. I think it might be the theme for the next few months. And in a way, it feels like it's been the theme at the national level for the last 10 months or so. Um, so with apologies because there are a few more specific questions we didn't get to, but I just want to say thank you so much, Bryan. You're welcome to stay, hear all about some of the economic justice issues. But we're so grateful for you taking your time. We're very happy we didn't schedule this for yesterday when you would have certainly not been able to join
I
us.
would have had to duck out. I would have had to duck out for sure. If I barely had time to breathe yesterday.
Well, and I just want to second our thanks. This was a great overview and synopsis. So yeah, we really appreciate your time.
I really appreciate you having me, and while I would love to stay, unfortunately, I got to duck out because I do have a couple of phone calls I need to make. But thank you so much for having us and thinking about Maryland Matters. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Thank you. And I'll put back up the PowerPoint so you can see how to follow Bryan on X. I still want to say Twitter, sorry. And of course, Maryland Matters, a great source of news, especially for those of us who follow state work and who care about what's happening at the State House. So with that, we will pivot to some of the legislation on the economic justice frame. And I guess we should just preface it by saying the first day of the actual session for 2026 will be January 14th. And we don't anticipate that any of these bills would be taken up in special session. So, at this point, we're really talking about the 2026 legislative work.
Great. Yeah, and I think just to underscore some of the things that Bryan was saying, which again, I think reflect a lot of what Jennifer and I've been talking about internally, is that um, for a lot of, unlike a lot of years, I feel like a lot of legislators are still getting all of their bills in place and still trying to figure out exactly what they're going to do. And because of the number of really devastating things happening at the federal level, people are really scrambling a bit to try to figure out the best way to react. And I think there is, from an advocate perspective, some inherent tension that you'll see over the course of the session, where, you know, advocates, certainly for our work, we want to double down and have Maryland be leading in protecting people and passing strong economic justice reforms. But that is in tension with the fact that we have this $1.45 billion deficit, and it's an election year, and taxes are off the table. And so I think, what needs to be done and what can be done in 90 days, and where to prioritize given the multiple challenges coming from the federal level as well as within the state is going to be a constant sort of discussion, negotiation, and everyone who's on here who's a supporter, we will definitely be looking to you all and calling on you all to let legislators know that you care about these issues and that these are things you want to see happen in our state, and you want us to be stepping up and leading, one of the states leading on putting things in place to protect our families, our workers, our older adults, etc. So we're just going to go through quickly some of the bills that are right now on our docket, and some are more fully fleshed out than others. I want to note that as well. So some we have bill language for, some are still in idea formation. But we want to save plenty of time for discussion and questions and feedback. So, one of the things that we've been talking about on the financial justice front is, as I'm sure everyone knows, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau at the federal level has been devastatingly weakened. It has essentially been gutted. It is being led by Russ Vought as one of the people who was the architect of Project 2025. And they are rolling back protections, oversight, and rules. So, one of the ideas that we would love to do is to backfill some of those protections that are not preempted, so that at the state level we can at least protect Maryland um, households in terms of protecting them from predatory financial actors, looking at credit, looking at some of the fintech, which is one of the areas the CFPB had been expanding in. So, wanting to backfill some of those protections. One way might be to have sort of a consumer financial protection czar. One way may just be a slate of bills that backfill wherever we can that's not preempted. Um, Another area that is really important, and there is legislation right now, is that Maryland, for more than 40 years, has banned payday loans in our state. So there are no storefront payday lenders because we cap our consumer loan rate um, at, you know, a level, it's 33%. So you can't make short-term consumer loans above that rate. And that's been historically our policy. Last year, legislation passed that allowed payday loan apps to act in our state and to be regulated in our state and to be legal. Those apps are places like Earnin. You may see them PayActive, where you can access your wages before your payday, and they provide there are fees to expedite. They ask you to tip them for the service of getting your own money out before payday. And essentially, the interest rates are effectively more than 100%, so far above our normal cap. The bill did pass last year. The governor expressed his concerns, and there will be legislation this year that will ban the practice of tipping and make sure that these loans conform to some other non-anti-discrimination statutes in our code. So we will be working on that. Um, some work we're doing around debt is around one issue is around coerced debt. So that is debt for someone who is the victim of intimate partner violence, where their abuser forced them to either take out a loan, refinance a mortgage, or take out other credit in their name. And the abuser basically ran up the credit and ruined the individual's credit score and rating. And in the court, if they are pursued by creditors, debt collectors for these debts, the person who's been abused can note that they were a victim of abuse. There will be a process to investigate that, and the creditor could pursue the abuser rather than the victim through a court process. So we're supporting that. We think that's really important. And we are seeing, and we do know that during times of economic distress, intimate partner violence increases as well. So we also expect these sorts of things to tick up. Several states have passed this kind of legislation. We are also looking at identity theft. We work with some great consumer attorneys, and they've noted that there are multiple challenges with getting redress on identity theft. And again, this will create a process within the court to identify victims and make sure that creditors can ascertain whether or not that individual took out the credit or was a victim of identity theft, and some processes going forward. Um, we're saying other reforms to watch. Um, Maryland Legal Aid is going to be looking at, and we're supporting um, legislation on a homestead exemption, and that means that when you're pursued for a judgment, you can protect at least $150,000 in the equity in your home. And that's still below you know, below what many other states do, but it'll be the first time we've improved this in decades and decades, and it's a great reform so you can protect some of the hard-earned equity. Um, Looking at allowing people to buy things with cash, which seems, a little upside down, but there are obviously lots of stores that don't allow cash purchases anymore, and that is an issue for people who get paid in cash and for folks who are unbanked. So just providing an option at a certain level. And then I'm on a work group that's looking at consumer loan licensing, and there are lots of conversations in that work group about our consumer loan licensing law, what should be regulated, what shouldn't. One of the things that we may be looking at is auto financing. When you go to purchase a car, they often will then send you to an auto financing dealer. And those financing deals are not regulated. They don't have to be licensed or registered right now in Maryland. So we think they should be licensed as an installment loan provider because that's what they're providing. All right, I'm talking some more. So medical debt, this is an issue that is critically important. We've been working on since 2019. A couple issues right now. One is that if you, especially go to a dentist, if you have a vet, um, when you get bills or they tell you how much it's going to cost, they often will offer a financing agreement from a healthcare credit card, um, so that you can apply right there for healthcare financing. We just want to put some guardrails around that. We want to make sure it's transparent. We want to make sure that people know that they are not getting a loan and that it's an installment loan through another company, not through their dentist or their vet. We want to make sure they know what the APR is, the interest rate, and we want to make sure that we prohibit the practice of financing, 12 treatments at the first stop, that you should only be financing what the treatment that people are having or the treatment that your pet is having, not a year's worth of treatment before the treatment happens. So we'll be working on that. We're going to be working on private equity owned medical facilities and some legislation around guardrails on those abusive practices. And we are looking at the role of private equity in veterinary practices. And again, I think this will particularly look at transparency, making sure people know if a practice that you'd gone to was purchased by private equity, and providing, again, some guardrails and some more information, some sunshine on those veterinary practices as well.
And as we go to this next slide, I just want to thank people. I see questions are being added to the Q&A, and we will have time to answer them at the end. So please definitely use that tool to put your questions in as we go. Marceline, do you want me to take over here, give you a little bit of a break, or do you want to tackle the first one? Because this one is one of your babies.
I'll tackle the first one, and then if you can tackle the second, that would be great.
Yeah.
Little tag team action here. So, establish a 10-year statute of limitations for home foreclosures. Maryland is one of three states, Alabama and Connecticut are the other two, that has no statute of limitation for foreclosures. A 10-year statute brings this in line with Virginia and a lot of our surrounding states, and it just means that if you know, if a bank or lender is pursuing foreclosure, they have a clock is ticking. It's a 10-year clock, but they have to foreclose within that timeline. And I think that just provides some clarity and um, assurances both for the homeowner and for the lender. The other is based on stuff that has come up from our Securing Older Adult Resources program, We, as I said, provide tax credits, homeowners and renters tax credits assistance. And SDAT, which has the applications online, downloadable, applications are not available in Spanish, and we've been asking for a couple years. So this will just require that the tax credit applications are available in Spanish. We would like to move to other languages as well, but starting with Spanish because there's a real need with partners we work with, and that way people can just download those from the web and fill them out. And we hope that that would expand the number of people getting renters and homeowners tax credits. Um, Recently, there was a court case around the use of algorithms to set rental prices. The decision was in favor of the was in favor of saying that they did use algorithms to price set. So last year, legislation was introduced just prohibiting that practice. And now that the court case has resolved, there will be legislation again looking at that. And again, I think this is a really important protection. And then we've been working for a couple years on fair housing testing, and a number of states, I believe more than 40, allow fair housing testers to record um, when they're going in and asking about source of income or other kinds of when they're doing any kind of fair housing testing. The bill's passed the Senate for the past few years, but has not passed the House. So we will be bringing that back and looking to see if we can come in line with the majority of states who've been able to win meaningful settlements with with those records. And I will turn it over to you, JBD.
Great. So we work in partnership with Renters United Maryland, and together we'll be advancing a package of tenant reforms. I will say we have also heard from legislators on a number of other tenant rights related issues. So we do expect the list of bills will grow and we'll probably weigh in on others, but these are the priorities as we enter session at least. One that I'm sure everyone here heard about last year, it will be coming back. This is good cause protections. So right now, a landlord can evict a tenant without any sort of legal good cause. And often you see retaliatory evictions where maybe a tenant complained about a mold infestation or other quality of life, basic issues, and they get evicted instead of fixing the problem. So this legislation has passed the House a few times, and the hope is that we're much closer to breaking the logjam in the Senate. A lot of good work has happened this summer, and so we're cautiously optimistic going into session that this critical, sort of foundational protection can pass. There will also be a few bills trying to deal with some of the most abusive screening practices that keep tenants out of housing. One that will be coming back is eliminating some of the criminal history that could be used as a reason to not rent to a tenant, things that aren't really at all related to whether or not they are a good tenant, but maybe show up on their criminal record. There'll be legislation saying that for voucher holders, for people who are already, clearly needing financial assistance, that their credit score cannot be used as a reason to not rent to them. It just doesn't make sense, frankly. If you already have a need for voucher assistance, then you probably have a financial history where your credit score is not going to be great. So that doesn't make any logical sense to use as a reason for these voucher holders to prohibit tenancy. And the last one is starting to deal with some of these emerging tenant screening tools and apps that are out there. Landlords are increasingly using sort of AI generated tenant screens to determine whether they'll lease to somebody, but there's no quality control on these screens. And as we all know, ChatGPT can be great, ChatGPT can be terrible. And so the bill that's still in drafting would say if you deny a tenant based on a screen, you have to at least give them a copy of the screen and they have to have a chance to rebut or clarify or correct the record. The next set of bills is around convenience fees, which we call junk fees, but we're trying to be a bit more politique, I guess, with this slide. There's a host of fees that are not always disclosed up front, whether it's trash collection, use of common areas, a pet fee. And sometimes tenants sign the lease and don't know what all these fees will be, and that drastically changes your monthly bill. So there's one bill that would just require transparency up front, that you have to let a tenant know before they sign the lease what they're signing. The other one would say that there has to be one fee-free way to pay. You can't force someone to pay online and then force them to pay a 3%, 5%, 8% convenience fee for the benefit of paying online. So a lot of work around there. And we do think these are the critical reforms that will make a difference for tenants right now as they're facing all these financial difficulties. And again, we're going to be working in coalition to advocate for funding for the Eviction Prevention Fund, which is under the Community Schools Program. I do want to acknowledge Governor Moore did put funding into that pot pretty recently. And so clearly, this is an issue that they see as important and that they're willing to tackle. And the request is it's been funded at about 5 million a year for the last 2 years. It's nowhere near the amount of funding that it needs. So we're asking for as much as 25 million. We know the program was only established with a $10 million allocation. So to us, that should be the bottom line, not the sort of cap, which is what we've seen. And
This
energy,
is
another,
you.
this is also me. So another issue that is just a core pocketbook issue for our clients right now. We are hearing from, especially our solar clients, our older adult clients, that they're having to choose between their energy bills and their medicine and their food and their rent. I mean, these are real life decisions. There were a lot of progress made last year in the big energy bill. There was like an omnibus package bill that passed that said that BG&E and others could no longer charge you and me for things like corporate jets, trade association fees. And we're already actually seeing, as hard as it is to believe, we are seeing prices go down a bit related to that law. It's just prices have gone up in other areas, so we're not feeling it the way we'd like to, but we are seeing that make a difference. But there were a few areas where continued progress could be made. There's conversations around changing the return on investment so that companies are no longer guaranteed an 11% return when they do new investments, which obviously would save, tremendously for consumers. And in some other states, it's as low as 4%. So 11 is quite high. And then there were some pieces like CEO compensation, lobbying fees, that campaign donations, which aren't allowed to be charged to consumers, but there's some talk about banning them altogether for utility companies. So whatever sort of comes together as we get into session that would help rates, we're very excited to work on it. And we do want to flag the BG&E multi-year rate plan will be before the Public Service Commission starting probably in March. We expect them to file. And this is going to be a priority outside of session that you're also going to be hearing from us a lot about. That some of these new laws that passed, the new requirements that are being put on BG&E, that the PSC needs to implement them and really look critically at the multi-year request. Maybe even don't allow multi-year requests since it was only supposed to be a pilot, make them come back to a year-by-year plan because that is ultimately where your rates are decided. And BG&E is this year, but other companies will be coming up soon. And BG&E is going to set the model because it's the first one. There's also some interesting conversations happening around how to impact sort of the overall costs on the grid. There's not much we can do to affect supply side pricing because that's set at a regional level by an entity called PJM. PJM's kind of terrible. It's run by utilities, so it makes lots of decisions that aren't in the best interest of ratepayers. But there are reforms Maryland can do, like making it easier for community solar projects to connect with low and moderate income residents, making sure that they're able to tap into cheaper local energy. Looking at these data centers, the question that was asked before, making sure that if they come into the state, we can require them to pay an impact fee for their energy use, just like we require home builders to pay an impact fee for their environmental impact on on the local watershed. So there are reforms that can be made to try to address some of these other issues, and we're optimistic to see those move forward as well.
Great. Additional reforms. I am just going to touch on these because I want to make sure we have plenty of time for questions. I know time is moving quickly. Um, I'm part of a work group looking at auto insurance affordability. There's going to be some recommendations coming from the work group. I think the one I just want to highlight is the work group is going to do a study, is recommending that the Maryland Insurance Administration do a study about low-cost auto insurance programs. California has a low-cost program, and on average, people pay about $400 a year for their auto insurance. Those are for good drivers that are, at, you know, with low and moderate income. So they're looking at that, but they're also looking at programs from New Jersey and other places. So I think any recommendations would really be coming for the 2027 session. Um, Digital equity is a huge issue, especially for older adults. And I know there are conversations and there should be legislation this year looking at funding to make sure that people can maintain broadband access, that they aren't getting throttled with their speed times, and that we can expand access. And I think, a lot of the work we're doing is, really trying to address debt and the high cost. Some proactive things that would do that is a living wage. So we're part of a coalition that is going to be fighting for a living wage for Marylanders, and also looking at protecting Marylanders from unlawful arrest and deportation. Community safety is about making sure that our neighbors are safe, and so supporting both our immigrant families and our LGBTQIA transgender community in safety is also going to be part of the work we are doing in coalition and allyship. So we'll just stop there because I think there were lots of questions in the chat and we want to be able to answer as many as we can.
And there's a great sort of correction in the Q&A. When we talk about the good cause bill, it is just enabling. So it makes it even more frustrating. It's been such a big fight, but it would enable or allow the counties to pass their own good cause laws, which is a really good catch. There was a question early on, and I know you worked heavily on this bill, Marceline. The state passed a bill saying that hospitals should not force people to repay if they fall below a certain income threshold. There's a feeling that it hasn't been implemented, and so there's a curiosity here, what's happening with that? Why isn't that law being followed, and what are some of the next steps?
Great, great question. If you're, I think that I want to make sure I'm getting the question right. If it's around whether or not people should um, have their debt forgiven if they qualified for financial assistance. That is one of the laws that passed. We actually produced a guide to medical debt, and that's on our website, which lays out kind of your rights under all the laws that have passed to date to try to make it easy and understandable for people. I think implementation is a challenge. We are looking at with partners right now the debt collection and charity care from the hospitals over the past couple of years. So our hope is to be able to have some information and a report about how hospitals are redoing. I also am supposed to be meeting with the Health Services Cost Review Commission to talk about what complaints they've received and what they've been doing in terms of auditing and enforcement. So we are trying to make sure things are being implemented, but it's a process in terms of trying to get the data and the continuing conversation. And we want to be able to have that information so we can see whether or not more additional legislation or enforcement is needed.
Thank you. And we have a few more questions here, but definitely, and not so much time, but definitely if you have a burning question, please do put it in the Q&A or the chat. I'm trying to keep an eye on both. There's a question about, do we ever model state legislation off of things that are working successfully at the county level? I think that in the realm of some of these tenant protections we often do, one of the big fights around good cause, there's been great work done at the county level on sort of rent caps and vacancy controls so that the prices of apartments aren't just skyrocketing year after year. And it's been a bit of a tension with good cause, making sure that no one uses that bill to undermine the good county work. Um, I don't know, Marceline, if you have any other examples of counties leading the way. A lot of these issues ultimately are sort of federal first, especially things like interstate commerce, things come into play. So it's not often that we can pull from the counties, but
But I think we do when we can. When
yeah,
when when counties are doing a really good example, it's great to be able to be like, just do what Prince George's County did, or just do what, Baltimore City's doing, or Montgomery County, etc. So
yeah.
If you have examples too, please let us know because we may have missed some great county level approach, and we'd love to know about it.
And that's a great segue to our last slide here, how to stay in touch. As we said, the legislative session starts on January 14th, which feels sort of far away, but it also feels
Not at all.
imminently around the corner. And we are going to need everybody's support, your actions, your engagement to advance these reforms, especially with so many other issues, taking up a lot of oxygen in Annapolis. So please, go to the website, follow us on Facebook, follow us on YouTube. We have a link on our website where you can enter your name to make sure you're getting all of our action alerts and email updates. And of course, 'tis the season of giving. We're a small, lean fighting team at Economic Action Maryland Fund, and your donations make our work possible. So please, you can donate on that website because we need your support. It's a huge challenge to be up against well-funded opponents in Annapolis, um, and we do it pretty well, but not without you. Marceline, any final thoughts to add?
I just want to encourage you again to sign up. Stay tuned. Um, the when we are successful, it is because we have all the folks here, either in partnership and coalition or calling, writing, meeting with their legislators and telling them these issues are important to us. So I want to thank everybody who joined today, and I want to thank all of you for your partnership and support. And we look forward to working with you in what's going to be a very interesting and I think challenging session, but one where we want to make sure we can actually make progress for, hardworking households, financially fragile households throughout our state. So thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.